To Yanlan, Rosarin, Kat, Yongjin, who all came early, chatting up a storm inside the rooms. Also, I just want to remind you guys, if you have any questions, it doesn't have to do with the talk. It doesn't have to be about the talk either. But just, you can start putting your questions in right now. Don't worry about it. Put it in. There'll be someone there to take the questions out, put them into the lineup. So if you have any questions, anytime, right now, during the talk, if you're reminded of something, just go ahead and put it in. Right? And then we'll make sure that your question will be one of the first because it'll be one of the earliest ones too. Is there anything else I'm missing before we start? Probably not. Okay, so just take a last sip. Well, not a last sip. It's my last sip because I have to talk and you guys can sip the entire time. All right, so everyone sit back, relax, enjoy your water, your bubble teas, your lattes, whatever it is, and we're going to begin today's Taco Tuesday with the story of Matthew. Now, for those of you who read the Bible or know anything, no one really knows anything about Matthew, okay? Like Matthew is very rarely talked about in the Bible. There's only a very few instances. So, even for me, I was like, oh, why did I choose Matthew? Like, there's not much to say about him. He isn't mentioned much in the Bible, okay? So I'm going to tell you, first let's start off with things that we already know. What do we know about Matthew? Number one is tax collector. And everyone, just like today, no one likes a tax collector, right? But back in those days, it was even worse, okay? In those days, tax collectors were hated. They were absolutely hated. They were people that stole money, but basically, they worked for the Roman government, and they basically took more money from their own people and kept the rest and gave whatever the Roman government needed. So the richer they were, the more of a terrible person they were considered, okay? They were cheating, stealing from their own people. They kept the money for themselves. The second thing you have to know about Matthew is this. He was called by Jesus to become an apostle. Now, the thing you have to understand about what an apostle is someone, especially at that time, who lived at the time while Jesus was living. And on top of that, he was chosen as only one of 12 who were to be like Jesus' closest companions, the one that were closest to him, the ones that saw his everyday life, not just out when he preached, but inside the house too, and all the other things that other people couldn't see. So that made him extra special too, because he's considered really great if you're considered only one of 12 in all of history that really hung out with the Messiah. Third thing, if you take a look at Matthew chapter 9, verse 9, this is a good verse just to show. When Jesus called Matthew, he was just a tax collector sitting at his booth collecting money. All of a sudden what happens is, hey bro, come follow me. And Matthew's like, all right, cool. And he leaves everything behind just to follow Jesus, right? So it says a lot about Matthew, what kind of character and how good of a person he really was too. Third thing was, after Jesus died, he resurrected, he ascended into heaven, and then he preached the gospel. Okay, now he was someone who preached the gospel to many countries. So those of you who don't know, a lot of scholars say that he was the one that preached to Syria, Media, Persia, Parthia, and he established churches even in Ethiopia. Not the African Ethiopia. There's another Ethiopia that was near the Caspian Sea. So he was someone that did a lot of work for the history of God. And of course, the fourth and the one that all of us know is he wrote one of the 4 Gospels, right? In the Bible, there are only 4 accounts of Jesus' life, and he was one that saw it. He was an eyewitness. He saw it firsthand, and his book was chosen to be in the Holy Bible, right? So, you got to think about it. There was 12 of them, but Matthew's was chosen, right? And he was the one. One thing good about him was he was there from beginning to end, and he was one of the people there for the ascension, okay? So not everyone was there for that. So that's kind of interesting also. So that's kind of the story of Matthew. And I'm going to be very honest with you guys. There's not a lot to go with. Because a lot of this stuff is just like, hey, Jesus says, come follow me. And like, he has dinner at his house, and that's all we know. Like, there's no other thing in the Bible that talks about Matthew, even though he wrote one of the books. He never even talked about himself. There's not much of a story, if you think about it. Right? There's not much of a story at all. So, even for myself, it was like, oh man, it's so difficult to kind of figure out life lessons or things I can learn from Matthew. But there's one verse that inspired me in John chapter 21, verse 25. And this is a very interesting verse because it talks about Jesus' life. And there are so many things that were untold and unsaid, or so many things that you would reasonably, you can assume, right? Because, these are all human beings and we all go through similar different things. It says, right? It says that so many things happen in Jesus' life, you couldn't even write all of them down, or else the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written. And if you think about our lives too, it's not like we write every single thing that we do. In our diaries, we just kind of go by what we feel or significant things that happen, right? But for Jesus, there are just way too many things. And also Matthew too, as someone who's one of the 12 apostles, the one thing you have to realize is there were so many things that happened and so many things that he went through. It's just that the Bible's not really focused on the apostles. It's more focused on Jesus himself, right? So there are many things that we can learn, and I want you guys to understand how much of a deep and meaningful life that Matthew lived as being only one of 12 to actually see Jesus in his everyday life, to live up close with him, see all the miracles and all the words firsthand, right? So let's get into some life lessons, okay? So let's go into the first one. The first one I thought was very interesting, and something that we have to kind of assume some things in it is he was someone who was able to drown out the noise. Now, what does that mean, drown out the noise? Now, drowning out the noise, like for instance, I'm a basketball player. Well, I was in high school and university. And as a basketball player, what happens is to drown out the noise means like you have a very pressure shot. You're on the free throw line and you have to shoot. To drown out the noise means that you stop thinking about everything around you. You don't hear anything. It's just you and the basket. And you're just going to take the shot without any pressure or people screaming or whatever it is, right? Because imagine if you're a professional basketball player, 20,000 people screaming at you. If you listen to all that's going on and all the pressure that's coming on you, what happens is that noise begins to affect how you shoot or how you perform. Now, what does it mean that Matthew drowned out the noise? What I kind of told you before that he was a tax collector, which was hated. Actually, in Israel, tax collectors were considered people who betrayed their country. That's how bad it is. Betrayed their country. Why? Because the Roman government didn't collect their own taxes. Someone had to volunteer from those people to collect taxes. So not only are they working, and they call them publicans, right? Not only are they working for the Roman government who's oppressing them, but on top of that, they're stealing even more money from their own people. And especially when it comes to people in the Old Testament time, that's one thing you were not allowed to do. It was like against the Bible. And this is why they weren't just hated. They were despised. Now, how despised were they? Take a look at Matthew chapter 9, verse 11. This is when he invited Jesus over to his house to eat. Okay, so they're at the tax collector's house. And look what the religious leaders say. They said, "Why does your teacher," meaning Jesus, "eat with tax collectors and sinners?" Now, you guys have to understand this terminology of sinner back then in the Old Testament time. It's not the same sinner like, you know, when we go to church and we're like, we're all sinners. We've all sinned. It's not talking about that type of sinner. Totally not talking about that. The type of sinner it's talking about is a small minority of a group that are worse sinners than everyone else, like prostitutes and tax collectors in that area. So they went to Jesus. How dare, look at this guy hanging out with sinners, right? And that's why today's title is Sinner to Saint. He was actually considered one of those sinners, the minority, one of the worst in all of Israel. And you have to think about this. One of the things that he had to do was he had to be able to drown out all the noise around him because so many people hated him. They despised him, right? And you think about this. He had to drown out everything so that he can make the right decision, right? He had to make the right, and the reason why this is important for us right now, for all what we're talking about between you and I now, life lessons, is there are a lot of times when we are too affected by the noise around us, whether it's people or what we think other people think of us. What we assume they're thinking about us, or what we think of ourselves. Like, you know, sometimes you feel like you've done something so bad, you can't even go in front of God. You've done something so bad, you can't even say sorry to your mother. And you just feel this pressure like, oh my gosh, there's so much noise going on. And because of that noise, you are unable to move forward, right? You see, people do think a lot about what others think of them. And when you think about it too much, it stops you from doing what is right, right? And you have to realize there are more important things than the things around you, this public perception around you. And it's very, very difficult for us to move forward, right? And the thing we need to understand is this, right? We have to push past the noise in order for us to move forward, right? And this is something that's absolutely necessary for all of us here too, because our situation is not even like Matthew. But our situation's still pretty bad right now in the social media age, where we're always looking to see what people think of us, how many likes we get, and how, who is like commenting on my thing, how many subscribers do I have, how many people on my TikTok, how many people on my like Instagram, or whatever it is, right? And it is a time where it's very difficult to drown out the noise. But the one thing that Matthew was able to do was he was literally able to drown out the noise and able to move forward and do something that other people couldn't. And that's the first thing we have to learn from what Matthew did. It's actually really honorable that someone considered so bad, cheating and stealing money from his own people, was able to look past what everyone thought and join Jesus at this time, someone who is the most righteous, okay? Second thing is very interesting. Second thing is what? Is giving up everything. Now, what does that mean? Like, he recognized he was wrong. He recognized he was someone who was stealing and cheating. He wasn't a very good person, but he was able to give up everything. Now, what does that mean, right? Why is it so important to give up everything, right? It doesn't mean he sold everything that he had. It doesn't mean he sold all his money, gave it to them. It's not talking about this, right? It's talking especially about things up here. Giving up everything. Is this something that we're able to do? Look at 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 17. Very, very interesting verse. And it says that if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come, the old is gone, the new is here. Which means, you have to think about this carefully. The old is not just hanging out by the side. It's saying that the old is literally gone. Right? It is literally gone. And this is one of the things that has to happen in order for you to have change in your life, in order for you to make a big change from becoming this into this. It does require a complete giving up of all the things that you don't want to do anymore. And one of the things that's really, really hard is he gave up his job where he's making money, his livelihood. That's what he gave up. He gave up his job. That was the very thing that was making him steal, lie, and cheat his own people. And he cut off the very thing that made him a bad, or gave him the temptation to do these bad things. You see, one of the things that's really difficult for us too is, we know, guys, everyone out there, how many of us know when it's wrong, but we still do it? Or, what's even crazier, right? What's even crazier with us is, we know it's wrong, and we can justify it. We're like, well, it's not that bad, is it? Like, maybe, but yeah, okay, so, yeah, it's not that bad. And we kind of justify it in our minds like it's okay to do, right? But what has to happen is, in order for Matthew to make such a great change in his life and to become such a good person, a better person, he was able to give up everything, anything connected to it. Anything that allowed him to be moved into that type of situation where he could start doing it again or be tempted by it. And what we know, and even I know this about myself, is sometimes we only cut off the things that we want to cut off, but the things that we just kind of like, we just kind of keep them, right? We're like, oh, do I really have to give up this? Like, come on, it's not that bad. And we try to justify everything. But in order for us to make a big change like Matthew did, it's not just about drowning out the noise and making a decision. But if you want to stay in that decision, stay, like for Matthew, it's staying where Jesus is, in a better place, in a more righteous, in a good place. He had to give up everything, right? That's why that scripture we just read is, the old is gone, right? And the thing that he was really able to do is give up everything. And I'll give you an example. Perfect example is this. If you're someone trying to give up drinking, let's pretend that's something you want to give up, and you know that, drinking makes you kind of rowdy, or it makes you do stupid things that you don't want to do anymore. It doesn't really make sense that you give up drinking, but you still hang out at bars. It kind of doesn't make any sense, because you're not drinking there anyways, and you're just kind of putting yourself in a position where you can easily go back into that lifestyle. You'd have to completely cut it off. Right? You'd have to not go, or even if you're completely cutting off, you'd have to cut off even the people that give you a bad influence or keep trying to influence you to do it again. It's the same as smoking. Like, how can you stop smoking if you keep hanging out with people that keep smoking? Right? And this is why one thing that is really honorable about Matthew was, not only was he able to drown out the noise, and like you don't know, you don't understand how bad he was looked upon. But on top of that, he was really willing to give up everything to start fresh and anew. And in our lives too, we have to realize, in order for us to stop going back and forth, right? Oh, I know, I did it again. Oh, no, yeah, no, I should do better. Oh, I did it again. And we go through these kind of cycles of, I did it again. Oh, I should be better. And you keep going through this guilt cycle. The greatest thing you can do, and the best way to do it, you have to completely cut off everything. That's the best way. It is the best way, because you'll have to put yourself into a new environment. Now, the third one is probably my favorite one. Because when you look at the rest of his life, he basically preached the gospel to 4 different countries, and he even, like, a lot of scholars believe that he was also a martyr, like he was killed, right? He was martyred for the sake of the gospel, right? And the thing you have to understand about this is, the thing I find most important about this is finding a purpose worth dying for. You're like, what? Like, worth dying for? Like, I'm dead serious, right? Finding a purpose worth dying for. How big is this to find a purpose worth dying for? You see, a lot of people can find things to live for. I want to live for my this. I want to live for money. I want to live for my job. I want to live to give my family good things. I want to live. Now, finding something like, if you find a purpose or a reason to live, there's one hard thing about this, finding something to live for. And you know what that is if you're finding something to live for, then you can go against your own principles, because you're trying to live. You're trying to live, right? So even if it gets to a bad situation and my whole thing is about my children, right? But then I can make a bad decision because I'll be like, oh, well then this is for my children, so I'm going to cheat on my test. If I don't cheat on this test, I can't live for my children and give them the things that they need, right? If you're living for, if you want to live, I just want to live, then what's going to happen when it comes down to you sacrificing yourself for your children or letting your children die? If your whole purpose, if you find something to live for, you can't die. Like, no, okay, just take my children. Take my children instead of me. That's what happens when you find something worth living for. What's more powerful and what is more unstoppable is finding something worth dying for. And this is something where no one can stop you, because you're willing to give up literally everything. There's nothing that can stop you but death itself. When you find something to live for, the problem with that is that eventually it comes down to a situation where you can morally go the wrong direction. Because you'd rather live than live by the code, the moral code. I'd rather live than live ethically. I'd rather live than live good. I'd rather live than live righteously or live for God, but I'd just rather live. And this is why finding something worth dying for is so much more powerful, right? You cannot stop a person who's willing to die. You can stop someone. You can easily stop someone who's trying to live. That's why you'll see those movies. Haven't you seen those movies with the hostage situation? And they're like, I won't say anything. And then you see their child. They're going to kill your child. Okay, I'll say it, right? But then someone who's going to die for it's like, okay, if you talk about the Christians who died after Jesus, after Jesus died and rose again and he went into heaven, there were like hundreds of thousands of people that died for the faith. They're willing to die for it. Let me give you an example. This is a perfect example. The example I'm going to give to you is the Vietnam War, okay? Now, this is a really interesting story. Why? Because the question is, how do you lose a war when you won every major battle? Isn't that kind of crazy? The U.S. in the Vietnam War, they won almost every major battle, and they say that when you look at some of the estimates of people that died, it was like for every American that died, 12 people in Vietnam died. 12, it's times 12, right? If you look at some of the estimates, it's like, that's crazy, but how do you lose when you won every battle? Why? Because the Vietnamese were willing to die for their country. They'd never stop. Even if they're dying 1 to 12, they kept going. They never stopped. And eventually what happened to the U.S., they're like, oh man, is it worth it? Is it worth it? Is it worth sending all these troops? Is it worth dying for? And they say it's not worth dying for. And they pulled out. So the Americans are like, we won. But actually, the very purpose of the North Vietnam, eventually took over the South. The South is where America was helping. So if you actually won, then you wouldn't let the communist regime of like China and Russia and them come in and take over all of Vietnam. But in the end, they just pulled out, even though they won every major battle. Why? You cannot stop people who are willing to die. You can't. And even though they won every major battle, and they were dying for every American, there was 12 Vietnamese dying. You can't stop someone who's willing to die. And this is what Matthew found. And I think this is something that you guys have to really think about too, is what is worth dying for? And when you look at the purpose, what are you living for? It's more than this, is what would you die for? Right? And if you can find this, then Matthew's life never changed because he's willing to die for it. It wasn't something he wanted to live. He didn't care about how well he lived. There was something so big in his life, it was worth dying for. And he went to it until the very end, into his old age. He never stopped. He never stopped, right? And this is one of the most important things that I think we have to realize too is, think about your life right now is, if you have nothing worth dying for, eventually, and then if you're just trying to live, you'll go against every principle and every reason you have in your heart. Eventually, if it gets down to the extreme, right? Even betraying your own family, your own friends, or whatever it is. What you have to find is not something worth living for. It's actually finding something worth dying for that's even bigger. People who find a purpose worth dying for never stopped. They'll never stop. Okay? So this is, even though it's a story of Matthew with only maybe 8 to 9 verses with him actually in it, we're able to find that his life too, we can learn from his life with all the other different things that we could just assume. Looking at, wow, he lived this type of life. Wow, how did he change his life so quickly from a sinner into literally, he's now called Saint Matthew. Okay? I hope you guys enjoyed today's talk. A lot of deep things to think about in this one too. And I hope that you guys will also be able to think about deeply, what about the 3 points I gave to you today? So those of you who are joining us for the first time, just head on over to our YouTube channel, Espresso with Sky, click the subscribe button, and also make sure you click the notification bell, and you will be notified whenever we have new videos and whenever we go live on the YouTube channel. Follow us on Espresso with Sky YouTube channel. Also, if you want to support our ministry, just head over to click that button for Patreon, and you can just click that button and support us there. And this Saturday, 1 p.m., we have not this week, sorry. We do have Saturday, 1 p.m. Bible studies, Bible lessons, but not this week. It'll be the week after, but you can still sign up. And when you sign up, every Saturday, 1 p.m., except this Saturday, fill in the sign-up form. We're going to email you the link. We got people from Hong Kong. We got people from Japan. We got people from Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, from everywhere, right? So it's going to be really, really fun, and any of you can join, so just kind of sign up, and we'll make sure that you get one of those, the emails sent to you guys. All right. Which means that it's time for question and answer. So I hope that you guys keep filling in your questions, and we'll see what we can talk about, what questions you guys have for today. All right, let's go to the first question. Over there, Stephen in Kuala Lumpur. And the question from Stephen is, I'm just not sure how I can do things radically to make a big change. Giving up too many things at once seems impossible. Okay, is there another way? And the answer is, there is a way to give up a lot of things at once. Now, I'm not going to just tell you, just do it, just cut it off, right? I'm telling you this, it's not going to be like that. It's not that easy, right? But there is a time when you can actually really cut off things completely, like on the spot. I'll give you an example. My father was in the army. He went to the Vietnam War too. My father was in the Vietnam War. And being in the army, one bad habit that he really picked up was smoking, right? It was smoking. But my dad quit smoking cold turkey, just on the spot. You know how? Because he had a reason to. He was moved, he was inspired to. Why? Because he was having children. When me and my brother were born, he had to quit, and he just quit cold turkey because he was inspired or moved to do so. What does that mean? when people are inspired, at that moment when you feel like, man, I really got to do this. You know when you get motivated and you're really, really inspired in your heart? This is the best time to do those things. I'm dead serious, right? There's no better time than the moment you are so inspired and so moved by it, right? Now, if you're not, right, I do think that you should sit down and write the things down. And you need to get yourself to a point where you can inspire yourself to cut these things off, because it's not easy, right? But you need to see it. Sometimes, like the one thing that's the worst thing that can happen is if you cause hurt or pain to happen, then you move, right? Because that means that you knew it was bad, but you had to wait until you hurt someone you really, really, really loved before you started thinking about kind of cutting things off, right? One thing is get motivated. And 2 ways to get motivated. Honestly, this is truth too. You can actually motivate yourself. Motivating yourself, you gotta find reasons, right? And even more so, the best way to motivate is actually starting and trying to do things. But it is sometimes, if it's not radical, it'll take a very, very, very long time for you to quit it, and it's gonna keep coming back and forth. For myself, a couple things. For myself, personally, I would rather just cut everything off. Just because it hurts more in the short term, but in the long run, it's much better, right? So, Stephen, I hope that you guys, you got to find a way, right? You got to find a way. Yeah, you could cut off the major things first, but if you don't cut everything off, there's always kind of that thing that can pull you back in, right? And so that's why you have to kind of reason with yourself, write the reasons down, write all the things down, the things that you could possibly do to hurt people. Like I know some people who drink and drive, and they haven't killed anyone, they haven't gone to any accidents, but like, do you really want to wait until that moment? Like until you actually kill or hurt someone and then quit, right? Like I would just go off and start watching YouTube videos of like these drunk people who have killed people and they're in jail. And they see how much pain they brought to their own family and other families too, right? So that's one thing. You got to get yourself informed. The more you know, the better it is. All right. Let's move over to Jean. Jean in Jakarta, in Indonesia. Jean in Jakarta. Okay. How do I stop listening to those people around me and drown out the noise? Yes, drowning out the noise is very interesting. Okay. Drowning out the noise. What's in this social media age? In basketball, because I watch basketball a lot, one of the things I find very impressive is when you see like these super famous people that have so many haters, right? So many haters against them, but it looks like they're not affected. And I was like going, man, these people are strong, right? How strong are these people to have all these people hate them, say hateful things against them, and they can still perform well? And I was shocked one time because there's a basketball player named Lebron James. Great basketball player, and they asked him like, "Hey, how do you like drown out the noise?" And he says, "I just don't read it." Yeah, I just don't read it. Which is like, I guess that's kind of easier, right? It's easier not to read it than to read it and try to overcome it. No, be strong and overcome it. But a lot of these people, these famous people, the reason why they can get over it is because there's a realization is these people aren't really that important in their life anyways. Like, who are they, right? They're not even important in your life. And for them, they don't even care. They're just there to play basketball and they're making millions of dollars, and that's fine for them. They're living the life, they're living the dream, right? For us too, like one thing I do tell you is a lot of times you don't really need to, a lot of the social media, it doesn't really make a difference, to be honest. Why? Most of these people don't even know you. And when it comes to the people that are around you, yeah, you have to surround yourself with really good people also, Gene. Yeah, because when they say, how do I stop listening to those people around you? Well, you'll be able to find a pattern of those people who are always saying those things to you. You know what I mean? There are those people that are always negative and always the ones that are giving you the negative information. And you need to catch those things. You need to be very aware of what's going on around you. And the people that are very, very negative, right? Then we need to be the ones that, I'm not going to say cut your friends off, right? But you need to recognize which people are the ones that are very negative, are always saying bad things. And these are the people you don't want to talk to when it comes to you needing encouragement and support, right? It's good to find a good support team, people that you really trust, people that you really, really know, and people that you know that are always looking out for your benefit. It really is. It's something that's really, really important too, okay? Thank you, Gene, in Jakarta. Let's move on to the next one. Next one is Sim-Ling. In PJ, also from Malaysia. It's not easy to ignore or push past public perception, especially if they spread false rumors. How can I ignore them? Okay, so public perception at our level, because none of us are really that famous, right? So public perception to us is basically like our friends groups, right? Our group of friends and maybe a little bit outside of that group of friends. And how do you push past public perception, especially if they spread false rumors? And how can you ignore them? So one thing that you have to understand is ignoring is kind of hard. Like there's very few people that have the ability to completely put on like the blinders and completely ignore. Like I used to be really, really good at that, but I don't know why I can't do that anymore. But I used to be really, really good at that, right? But you don't actually have to ignore it. Ignoring is like, if you say ignore it, you're telling yourself to do something that's impossible. Which means you're telling yourself to ignore it, but you can't. So what's going to eventually happen is you're going to just feel bad about yourself. Like, oh my gosh, how come I can't ignore this? And the answer is not so much to ignore, but what I would do, especially when it's the people, the public perception around us as people who are not famous, are usually people we somewhat know, right? And first thing I would do is I would actually talk to some of the close friends around me, like the people I really, really trust, and see what they think. See what they're thinking. Like, do they believe it? And say, hey, and you can explain. Say, hey, this is what's going on, right? But you also need to know, like, what are people saying? But the best thing, like, I would tell you this right now is, one of the best medicines ever is communication. It is. Like, if you talk it out, usually there's going to be some misunderstanding somewhere, right? There will be some, and you know what? Sometimes even our friends, close friends, make mistakes too. So it's not like, don't sit there like, oh, you betrayed me. No, sometimes people misunderstand, people make mistakes, right? But handle it maturely. Like talk to your closest friend. Hey, did you hear? I heard someone say this is, oh, yeah, oh, did you hear this? Oh, you did. Yeah, I wonder why they're saying that. Huh? Hey, can you ask one friend of yours? Yeah, and then you talk to someone else, right? But you want to, I would definitely make sure that the people who are closest to me, just see what they're thinking too, right? And if there are any misunderstandings, because it's possible we might have made a mistake. And that mistake might have caused a misunderstanding that caused a rumor to go out, right? And if there's a misunderstanding, the best way is to resolve the misunderstanding if there is one. If not, I know there are some people out there that are pretty terrible, or they're maybe not in a very good state at that moment, or maybe they're a little bit sensitive to certain things. I'm not sure, but there's always something that happens out there. But the best way I would say is, in these cases when it comes to false rumors, is communication the best. Don't hold it in, right? If you have friends you trust, talk to them right away. Right away, talk to them right away, because you trust them, right? If you trust them, talk to them right away. What if there's a misunderstanding? Then there's a misunderstanding and you want to resolve it first. So I would first kind of be proactive with it too. It's not very good to try to hold it in and just think nothing of it. It's better to do something about it, okay? Thank you, Sim, over there in PJ. Let's go over to the Philippines. Rianne, in the Philippines. How can we find our purpose? Something so powerful to struggle for and even to die for, right? So finding something, well, you have to think about this. In almost every case of finding something to die for is never about yourself. That's the first thing is, it is never about just you. If it's just about you making money, you being successful, you know, being the president, is not enough. Finding something worth dying for, you'll look almost 99.99999% of the times, it's going to be because of something outside yourself. It's bigger than you. That's why people can die for their country, right? That's why people can sacrifice, you know, themselves to save the world, right? Why are they able to do it? Because they have something that's bigger than yourself, right? And that's why a lot of people, when it comes to, like, say, faith, Matthew had a purpose that was much bigger than his life. It was bigger than the entire world, right? It was to spread the gospel and save people from death, right? And he lived his life saving other people. It was something so big that he could not see a single person go into, like, for people of faith, like going to hell. that he lived his life passionately, saving as many people as he could, right? So people of faith usually, when you have faith and when you start to learn about your faith really, really deeply, you can usually find something worth dying for. But you have to think about it very deeply, right? I know a lot of people go to church too. Like say if you're just like a Sunday Christian, people don't usually think deeply about their faith or why they're living. They're just kind of content with just having faith. And this is when a lot of these people kind of lose faith very, very quickly. And they go through these like up and down cycles, right? Like in faith, out of faith, in faith, out of faith. What's more healthier is remaining inside the faith, but having ups and downs inside your faith, which is much more healthier and the growth is much higher. But you have to first realize, the first thing you have to recognize about finding a purpose that's worth dying for, it has to be bigger than yourself. It just can't be about you. Yeah, for yourself, it's not worth dying for. You couldn't. You couldn't die for money, right? You couldn't die for health. Well, that doesn't make sense, but you couldn't die for health, right? Couldn't die for clothes. Couldn't die for a house. Why? Because you're the one that wants to live in it. You couldn't die for it. But it's something outside, like someone who dies for their children, someone who dies for their friends, someone who dies for their family or their country, right? You have to find something. This is my first step to start making you think a bit more deeply about is you have to find something greater than yourself. This is also what brings people together. If you look at the Olympics, it's for your country. The country gathers together, right? If there's a big earthquake, the country gathers together to help each other. The big explosion in Lebanon, the country comes together and helps each other and cleans and helps all the people who are hurt, right? It's got to be beyond yourself, right? And this is when you can start finding things worth dying for, okay? Thank you so much, Rianne, in the Philippines, for giving us that wonderful question. Yeah, these are really, really good questions too, and these can lead to other Taco Tuesdays and Bubble Talks also. So these are really, really good things that we can start thinking of. I can start thinking about, oh, that would be a good Bubble Talk. Yeah. Either way, that was the last question for today. I'm so thankful for all of you joining us here today on the 4th Taco Tuesday. It is the last Taco Tuesday of August. All right, next week's going to be September. It's going to be September already, as crazy as that sounds. It's September next week. Either way, very grateful. Thanks for all of you coming today. I hope you guys enjoyed today's story of Matthew from sinner to saint. Everyone have a wonderful day. And there are no more announcements, so we will end it here. Everyone, have a wonderful week, and hopefully see you either on Thursday for Bubble Talk or Saturday, next Tuesday, because there's no Bible study this Saturday. All right, see you guys later. Bye-bye.